This is Intimacy Architecture Radio with your host, Christy Ann Bella. Brought to you by Intimacy Architecture, www.intimacyarchitect.com. So if you're just tuning in, this is Blog Talk Network. I'm Christy Ann Bella. My guest is Andrea Banfield. We are here talking to you about sex, God, and Christianity. So I want to go back to this concept of sin. Because that was and that's actually intentionally why I named the show Sexual Inclusion Network. Because, first off, I think being inclusive is very important, but the initials are SIN, which is sin, and in my little jingle song in the beginning, you might have heard me say, sin is in, because the idea of sin is that you're separated, and I feel like that's bullshit. Like, you're never separated, you can't be separated, and so the idea that sin is in is actually like, no, there is nothing that you can do that would forsake you or separate you. You're always in. You're always in the loop. You're always a part of it. So did you have like some epiphany moment at some point where you were like, my sexuality is not a sin? Or what were your like early conflicts growing up, thinking like, oh, my desires or, my sexual...
It was... yeah, that's a whole nother story, my goodness. Oh, okay. So, let's see here. Well, first, with sin for me, like, when... I totally agree that we're always in. But for me, when we sin, it... Like, let me back this up. When we think that we're sinning, it takes a... It's cutting off our consciousness to our connection. Okay. So we're still connected, right? But we're just consciously not aware of it because we think we're sinning. And I say that because of the power of the Holy Spirit. Okay. So in like going, where are we going to go with this? So Moses, Old Testament, for people who are familiar with the Bible, Moses was the one who led the people out of Egypt. Right. And they get out to the desert. And there's, yes. And that song was on the radio today on the classical station. Really? Yes. I was like, how timely. So, anyway. Mount Sinai. They get out into the desert and a big, huge storm comes over the top of Mount Sinai. And many hear a voice. Many hear just a storm. But Moses is like, this is God wanting all of us to come up on the mountain so that we can commune with God. And everyone was afraid. They were like, no, Moses, you go, and you tell us what he said, which was the beginning of religion, right? Because everybody was afraid to have that direct connection with God. Right. They wanted somebody else to go be the spokesperson and come back and you tell us what God said. And so in the New Testament and what our teachings of what Christ has done and what I've personally experienced for what Christ has done is opened the way to everyone consciously, so that it's always been there, but now you can consciously be aware of it through knowing Christ's life. And there's so many different ways of coming in, already always there, but that's what Jesus did. And he brought another way for people to become aware of the consciousness. But it was also even greater than that, because I believe in this whole thing of the Christ going into the earth and everything else. And there's like cosmic changes. Yeah. But, so in the New Testament, I think it's in the book of 2 Corinthians. I'm not sure. Oh, anyway, somewhere in there. It's talking about how glorious it was when Moses came down off the mountain. It was so amazing. His face even shone, and the people were afraid to look at him. And he put a veil over his face but eventually that glory faded. And it basically was saying like, how much greater is this new way that will never fade? And it talks about how if you even read the Old Testament and the law, it puts a veil over your consciousness, so you can't be connected to the Spirit. Interesting. And it's only through the power of the Holy Spirit, like turning back to the truth of the Spirit, that veil is removed and you can function freely in the Spirit. Okay. I guess I find, a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm Christian, I saved myself for marriage, or
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. This is the idea that like
you have to save yourself for marriage.
You have to save yourself for marriage. Otherwise, it's a sin.
And it takes away from your partner.
Right.
You haven't ever met or know.
So did you buy into that?
I did at one point because of my trauma, because of the upbringing and it wasn't necessarily my parents. It was just the community of the church. And the stigma that you're taught through all the lessons in your in church. I mean, I don't even know if my parents knew what I was being taught and was being a part of who I was. And then how you project that onto your parents and think that's what your parents think. Like those kind of weird things like that. Okay. But for me, I struggled a lot. Where did I start struggling? Because, well, it kind of all came out. So like when I hit puberty, I was extremely sexually active. So it's when I was 14. So I started, and they would all, like, people would think in my community, like, nobody ever said. I had some friends who knew. Yeah. And I think that the church knew a lot of kids our age were doing that, but nobody ever told us it was wrong in that church that we were in. But there was still this. It wasn't until I was in high school that we got a new pastor for our high school group, and then he wanted everybody to know what was appropriate and wasn't appropriate, and he kind of set these guidelines of what's sexually appropriate for different levels and things like that. Okay. But that also coincided with all the times where when I finally just surrendered and found my beginning of my joy, and I was just like, okay, I am going to not be sexual. I'm not even going to have a boyfriend. I'm going to completely cut that whole part of me off. And I think that lasted 2 years, and then I met my husband. And he and I weren't sexually active, and that's what we were accused of doing, which was why it was so traumatic for me, the experience that we had. Because not only did I have the childhood trauma, but then I had my whole experience of giving up that part of me. And being deemed like and I knew for myself, like I needed to do that. I needed to take that break. And then having it, then here's a place where I've kept it, quote unquote, pure. Yeah. For whatever. And then now I'm being demonized for something I didn't even do. And then now that I've come away from all of it, I'm just like, and if I had, I wouldn't have been wrong. Right. So it was definitely the teachings that were around it that it's just
Since you brought it up, because you had like a spiritual epiphany moment that was like shortly right before I met you and you came to the book club. Oh my God. You had this like deep moment where you're just, so do you want to...
Well, it wasn't deep, but I actually went up on the mountain. Yeah. So like for a month and a half, I fasted. I wasn't even intentionally fasting. Right. I had this confliction within myself and I couldn't figure out what was real. I was just like, I gotta go lay down. And it took a month and a half of me like laying down and being completely in touch with the Spirit and acting on everything I felt the Spirit was asking me to do. And it led me to experiences that I could never have even comprehended. Yeah. And which then, and they were sexual experiences, and I would share with my husband what was happening. Right. And there was another party involved, but not like involved. It was all like either my imagination or what God was using to help me to grow or what else. But it was like there was another actual name and person in the picture. And it got to it. My husband was like, I really don't like this. And I'm just like, I'm following God. Or at least who I think is God. Like, I was like, I have to be able to trust that if I ask God to teach me what is true, that's Him leading me. And when I made that request, I was like, I'm holding on to your verse that says, anytime I ask God something, I'm to believe that He will answer me. Otherwise, I'll be cast to and fro like the waves of the sea. And every time I get to that place where I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay, it's because you're not trusting. Right. And I have been led into so many places that my upbringing or that whatever that weird thing is that comes in that upbringing that makes you, because it was never actually said by anybody, but that there's this weird energy that you just subconsciously know things. Yeah. And so, not in a good way, not like like that pressure, that confining. Yeah. And so, anyway, it got to the point where just from that experience of me being at home, me having sexual desires for somebody else, sharing them with my husband. I mean, because being married means I'm going to share my entire life with you.
Yeah.
That means like everything I think, I'm going to share with you.
Yeah.
And so my husband didn't like it, and he had, and it was coupled with on the high mountain. I call it my high mountain experience. I would I would go to the grocery store to buy food. Mm-hmm. I would go to choir practice, and I would sing at church on Sundays. And that was it. Yeah. And all the songs that we were singing, it was during the Advent season. Oh, okay. All the songs we were singing were about the desert rose in bloom.
Oh, wow.
And all these connections with Mary and the birth of Christ. And so it was like, I got goosebumps on the top of my head. And anyway, so it was just like, it was completely God. And my husband went from, I want a divorce. And I just said, I didn't argue. I was just like, okay. To him, I watched him. Like, we would go to church and sit there. And it was like he had a Joseph experience. Right. Where he was like, God let him know, this is, keep going with this. There's stuff, just keep going. This isn't her ego. This isn't, like, this is real. Yeah. And so he ended up going through this experience. And then right after that is when I saw you.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to touch on, because I feel like I actually just got off the phone right before this with a client, and it's like, I want to maintain client confidentiality, but like essentially it's a pretty common thing I hear, like Christian couples, they get together and they're like, okay, we took these vows and like that's it. And then so if anything else comes up, they just like shoot it down, or if they act on it, it becomes this detrimental, that's it, and it's over, and we've got to get a divorce, and like, and I'm just like, God, you guys are missing it. Like, you're missing this opportunity. Like, there's a reason why this person showed up, and we are all meant to spark different things in each other. And I'm not saying that polyamory is for everybody, but there's definitely this willingness to be open to connections, whether they're deeply platonic or if they're more than platonic. But there's something, and I feel like if we turn ourselves off and we're like, nope, I said this thing however many years ago, however many months ago, and like, that's it, and I just gotta like, and it's like, you're not leaving any room for discovery, for the Holy Spirit to come in, and
I think that's tied to the verse in the Bible where it talks about running the race that's been prepared for you. Like, so many people think, okay, then that means that this gridlock that I'm in, I've got to run this. And it's like, no, that's like you running through the gutter, like on your face. It's like, no, get on the path. Get on the path of trusting the Holy Spirit. And like, open up and like, know that you are covered, right? You're completely covered with grace and with love. And God has this entire, like, to me, when Christ, what he did is like he popped up a new tree in the Garden of Eden. That was the tree of grace, right? Like, here's the tree of grace. Go enjoy the garden. Like, go see what else is in this garden. Yeah. This is a big, huge, beautiful place that I've created for you. Go celebrate it. And you've waited like how long to come to this earth? Do you really want to spend your time here in the trenches? Like, go enjoy your life.
Fridays, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Like, share, and subscribe. Intimacy Architecture. Build a life you love.